Living Statue, Part 1. I woke up in a dark room without knowing who or what I am. I tried moving my limbs and realized I was in some liquid. The lights in the room flickered on as two large figures walked in. I couldn't make out their faces or anything about them besides for the clothes and what one of them was holding. The one with the clipboard said, "This is some of the stuff we took from the facility owned by the Blight's Biofuturistics Company." The other figure then walked closer and tapped on the glass of my container and said, "And this thing is?" The figure with the clipboard responded with, "This is the creation of Dr. Andrew Blight and his supposed magnum opus." The closer figure said, "This is the magnum opus of one of the children of the company's founder. The things that they make in secret are dangerous, but this is too small." "Perhaps he took it before it was fully developed," said the figure with the clipboard. "I guess we'll do tests on it later to find if it has any uses. Let's move to the other stuff we have to use," said the closer figure as they both left. "If I wanted to learn of my past and what I am, then I will need to find my creator. However, my first priority is to escape." I looked around at the room and saw terminals and screens. I saw a terminal connected to a camera looking at me and displaying what it saw. I saw what I look like, but I still don't know what I am. Then again, my knowledge of everything is minimal at the moment. I didn't know some things, even though I didn't know how I knew these things. I saw mechanisms connected to the top of the container. Perhaps those were locks keeping me in this container. I used the tendrils on my back to see what I could do to these mechanisms. I started to pull apart the mechanism, and it unlocked. I pushed it open and used my legs to crawl out onto the terminal. I dropped to the floor, and the room was large. Going through the door might get me caught. I looked over to a cover to a vent of the wall. I crawled up the wall and pulled it off. I climbed in, and the vent was very dark. I looked through the slits of different coverings of the vent and saw some things that were happening below me. I saw a major construction going on throughout the building. I went further in and started to feel the vent I was in shake. The vent started to fall apart as I was getting closer to the construction sites. I fell out of the vent and into a pool of cement. After falling into the pool of cement, I started trying to escape. But I had the thought that I would be seen escaping, and I had to think of some way of defending myself. I wanted to use the materials around me to make myself bigger. My body, off of instinct, maybe, started to secrete this strange substance that allowed me to have an easier time molding the cement, and I used my tendrils to pull in some rebar. I had a thought that maybe I could trick the humans in the facility that I am also human. I tried to think of a human hand that I could replicate around my limbs. I tried to then make the hand, and there were some minor imperfections. I started to make a full body out of the cement and rebar. I used the rebar as a skeleton, and cement, which I pulled some other materials to make concrete, which would be my muscle. The black secretions coming out of my body made me able to move the body I had created for myself. Hopefully, I was successful in making it look human as a disguise. I forced my new hand out of the cement and latched onto the ledge of the container. I started to pull myself out of the cement and pulled my head up, and I noticed the secretions coming out of the cracks of my new body. I pulled my legs out of the cement and realized that the feet didn't look human, but maybe they wouldn't notice. As I looked at my body, I noticed more imperfections that may not be so minor. My new body wasn't well designed, and again, it was my first time making one. It had many cracks and secretions dripping out of them, pieces of rebar sticking out of my body. My bottom jaw was attached to my upper one, my rebar skeleton exposed and covered in the secretions to help me move. Well, there are many imperfections in this body, maybe it will be good enough to seem human long enough for me to get away without being caught. "What is that thing?" someone said to my right. "It isn't human, that's for sure," said another. I turned to look at them, and they said, "Shoot it." They lifted ranged weapons, and the projectiles were too fast for me to dodge. I lifted my arm to block the projectiles and looked for a weapon. I saw the piece of rebar sticking out of the lower part of my neck. I grabbed it and pulled it out, with some concrete coming with it. It also had some of my secretions on it. I threw it at one of the shooters. It broke his gun and pierced the vest on his chest. "Why does it burn like that?" he said, as he pulled a secondary, smaller ranged weapon. I decided to run before they did too much damage to this body. I ran past some windows and saw the outside and decided to try and break down a wall and escape this facility the fast way. I ran through one of the walls made out of concrete and rebar. However, I noticed something very important that I should have thought about before running through this wall. I realized there was no floor. "Curse you, gravity," I said, as I started to fall into the forest below. I then think about something. Who builds on a cliff? I see the sun set as I fall, and I crashed through the trees and hit the ground. I try to get myself back up as I feel pain all over my actual body. My concrete body is beginning to fall apart, and rebar snaps apart and falls off. I exert myself to use my tendrils to try and force the body to move. I started to move myself back up. It was hard to move my body when I made it. Now it's literally falling apart. I started to slowly move onward into the forest. I have now escaped the facility. Now to look for my creator.